Thank you very much. Oh, good evening. How wonderful to have so many people. We need a really large hall, don't we, for this many people? That's wonderful. Now, I'm sure many of you know about the fair. You've picked up things, you've been there, you've been to perhaps the events in September when we seek to commemorate it. But I'm going to go back through the whole history, I hope, briefly. And anything I leave out or anything else I don't include, as Mary says, we can deal with in questions at the end. You may first be struck by the fact that I spell it without an O. That's because it's supposed to be pronounced Stourbridge, I'm told, by the people who live around there. So you can contradict me or not, but Stourbridge is what it ought to be. We have next slide. What can I say, Simon? Next picture. Next picture. No. Yes, right. So this is the symbol, if you like, of the fair, that all that's left of the leper hospital that was founded way back in the 1100s. So centuries ago, early Middle Ages, and the people of Cambridge deemed that it would be a good idea to have a place of shelter for the lepers, people suffering from leprosy. But they wanted it as far away from town as possible because they believed leprosy was very infectious, and somewhere convenient for the people who attended or were incarcerated almost in this hospital, that they could beg on the high road, and so they would be shut away, but not completely shut away. There were other buildings, of course. This is just the chapel. But we lost all those other buildings many centuries ago. But the chapel turned out to be rather useful for other purposes, as we'll see, so it survived. Next, please. So here's Cambridge's map. So some of you may recognize this, some of you may not. In the middle, we've got, is my arrow visible? Yeah? Everybody see my arrow going round and round and round there? Oh, and another blue arrow. Lovely. That is where Cambridge Centre is, just that bit there between the river and the ditch. And in the early Middle Ages, that was all there was of Cambridge, surrounded by its two big fields, Barnwell Field to the east, Cambridge Field to the west, cultivated by the people of Cambridge. So the Cambridge boundary is officially a long way away from the city or the town centre. Now, if we go out down the road to Newmarket, we get to the Priory first. The Priory also founded around 1000 AD, and moved out here from Castle Hill. So settled here at a spot which was supposed to be where the young people went to disport themselves, at a place where there were wells. So the wells are the part of the name, and the barn is from the bairns, the children, the young people. So it was always called Barnwell, but handily placed again between the road and the river. And then further out still, right out on the boundary with Fenditton, was the siting of the little Leper Chapel, Leper Hospital, back in the 1100s. So it was, yeah, beside the main road. So the poor people suffering and the people looking after them, the men of some religious order or other who looked after them, could beg on the road. And they were also given by benefactors some property in other villages from which they could draw a rent for their support. But somebody somewhere, or some people, decided that it would be a really great benefit to the support of this little hospital if they ran a fair. We have no idea how it began, sadly. Was there something going on before it got its official charter in 1211? We don't know. It's in the time of King John, who's sometimes given the credit for founding the fair, but I don't think he had anything to do with it, really. I'm sure it was the entrepreneurial people in Cambridge, or maybe the warden of the lepers was entrepreneurial himself, who decided that to get a charter to run an annual fair would be a really good idea for the benefit of the lepers. And it turned out to be an absolutely ideal site and an ideal part of the year to set up this fair every year. And it did run every year for centuries. There were one or two gaps in the 17th century when plague got really a bit too dangerous, and the fair had to be closed or not started, in fact, to cut down the risk of infection spreading across the country, because the people came to Stourbridge Fair from, I was thinking to say all over, not all over, East Anglia, the north, the Midlands. I have to admit, some people got trapped in Oxford if they were coming from the west, but from the north and the east, people came to Stourbridge Fair, and from London, of course, and it grew and it grew. So there it is, that's its position, right out on the boundary, just up from the common, which is down here, of course. It's marked Stourbridge Green. And the common, of course, remains and always has remained. Cambridge is very good at looking after its commons. They've all survived, I think, without being built on over the centuries. Can we have the next, please? Simon? Thank you. Right. So on the way out, if you were walking out that way, you pass the Priory, and this really is all we have left of it, apart from the Cellarer's Chequer. Some of you will know that little square building tucked down the back road. But Little St Andrew's was the church outside the Priory gate for the benefit of the local population. They wouldn't come into the Priory church itself, but they did have Little St Andrew's for their parish church, effectively, because a small village sort of grew up at the Priory gates. People who had business there or who worked for the Priory tended to live on the opposite side of the road from the gate. I always imagine the gate is at the end of East Road. If you come up East Road, and if you head in a very straight direction, not quite going round to the roundabout, but straight, you would have ended up at the gate to the Priory. And it was a priory, not an abbey. I'm sorry, everybody's adopted the name abbey, but it was headed by a prior, so it's a priory, or it was a priory. So that's the little memento we have of the Priory. Simon? Yeah. Right. What we also have, in a way, after the Priory was closed, of course, by Henry VIII, private owners took over the buildings and the land. And what we know later on, of course, is just Abbey House. Again, misuse of the word, but built roughly where the Priory was. It's got little bits of different centuries in it, and it took over the land that the Priory had owned in the great big Barnwell field. And its most notable occupant was this chap here, Jacob Butler, very, very notable eccentric of his time in the 18th century. He's got a whole history to himself. But people passed this way out when they were going out to the fair. So the next, thank you. So to give you an idea of the size at its maximum, I've had to put it on this much, much later map. You have to try to remember, in the earliest days, the town centre was just down here. You can see my arrow, or the blue arrow, just round there. And there was nothing. Once you got past the nunnery or Jesus College, there was nothing. None of the kite, of course, existed until the 19th century. There was just this empty road going through the fields and the commons, of course, extending down by the river. And that red hatched bit is roughly what the area of the fair at its greatest limit extended to. And as you can see, it's nearly as big as the town centre. So it really was a very big affair. It benefited by being probably in September. It was in September. It was the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross on September the 14th. The charter just said it would run for 3 days. At its height, it was possibly more like 3 weeks. But it was September, so everybody's had time to earn their money in the summer and take in harvests and generally work and produce goods that were going to be sold at the fair. And it, as we'll see, had a mixture of raw materials and manufactured goods, luxuries, and a little bit of entertainment. But it did occupy the whole of this area. And crucially, of course, it's next to the river. We'll look at that again in later pictures. But that's roughly how much it spread from just the chapel, which is somewhere over here. Try and ignore the railway, of course. Didn't exist until the fair had rather declined and nearly died. So the chapel's over there and the fair spreads out all over this area here. And September, a good time to have it. And very convenient for a lot of people. It's a 2 days trip from London. It's handy for East Anglia, as I've said, and it's handy from not far off the Great North Road coming down from the north and the Midlands. And next, please. So if we're coming down Newmarket Road, very difficult to imagine now. Newmarket Road just on the left-hand side before it was widened, and of course in the earliest days with no houses, nothing there. And if you can imagine, we're going to go down at the end of this road rather than up over the railway. Next. Right, so Garlick Row. Now, Garlick Row is very much a permanent street, but in the early days of the fair, it had to be created. It had to be created, and it was marked with a couple of stones, boundary marker stones, one on each side of where the row had to start, so that when it came to setting up the fair, the people would know where to lay this road out across the fields and down to the common. There was nothing there but the fields when they started, and there was another boundary stone at the bottom. So that gave them their markers for laying out the fair. I've never discovered if garlic was sold there. It may have been, well, in the early days, but it certainly wasn't later on. But anyway, Garlick Row is the name it always had, and it's kept. Next. Then we go down Garlick Row, Oyster Row. Mary just reminded me of the number of oyster shells that are still to be found down here from oyster eating in the fair times. So we go down there, we're going down to the common gate at the bottom, and then next on to the common itself. So as we'll see later, the fairground did extend onto the common at this end. There were booths across here. You can just about see where the boats are down there. Come to them in a minute. And of course, there was the ferry to bring people across from the Chesterton side. The ferryman did very well during fair time. That was when he made his money, really, in the old days, when there were no bridges at all along here. The only bridge was the Great Bridge in Cambridge, the Magdalen Bridge, or Silver Street Bridge beyond that. There was nothing out this way at all. So all crossings had to be by ferry. Next, please. And the river. I said the river is immensely important because so much traffic and so many goods were carried by water. So much cheaper to put a lot of heavy goods or bulky goods on a boat pulled by one horse than trying to put them on a lot of carts pulled by a lot of horses. So the boats came down bringing all sorts of goods to the fair, as they were the same bringing goods into Cambridge. That was where Cambridge was supplied with lots of heavy goods, building materials and so on. And not a pleasure river as it is now. But there, they came down from the north through King's Lynn, lots of disagreements with King's Lynn about the rights of boating and people bringing goods through at King's Lynn. But there it was, they could easily be brought down here and then the goods carted up to the fair. And next. And if we look across now, what they saw at the time, of course, on the other side of the river was Chesterton Church, which you can barely see now. Can you just see the spire at the bottom of the arrow there, behind all these new flats? But it became a bit of a marker point. And this picture is taken roughly from the end of Riverside, where Riverside meets the Common. Next. So now try to imagine without the road going over the railway. At this point, it would naturally have dipped down slightly to come past the chapel, which you can see marked here. The red arrow just points to the roof, down to the stream. And it was the bridge over the stream that gave its name to the whole area and affair, the Steers Bridge, probably meaning a cattle bridge. That's probably what it was. Most important, of course, for this main route going through to Newmarket. And the next. So the fair took place in September, and it was critical because it was over some of the agricultural land that everybody got their harvest in before the fair was due to start up. And people comment on this that it was a really critical moment. If you didn't get your crops in, the fair goers or the fair setters up could come in and just take over the land for the fair. And tough luck if you'd still got corn or anything else growing on it. The compensation, it was pointed out, was at the end of the fair time when everything was packed up. There was a closure date as well, and anything that the fair keepers had left on the land could be taken over by the agriculturists, the farmers, and they would compensate for all the fact that the land had been trampled down by all these wheels and all these feet during the time of the fair by the heaps of manure that were also around the area and other rubbish that they could then plough in. So it was this wonderful time of year. September is a good time, isn't it, really? The weather's usually not too bad. There have been occasions when it wasn't, but usually not too bad. Days still reasonably long, so a very suitable time to bring your heavy goods to the fair. Next. Maybe in wagons like this. How many horses? Let's see, 8 horses. But some of them would have had to be that big, as we'll see from the goods that were being brought. This one's got the special wheels that are not going to gouge up the road too much. And next. Some people were coming to the fair by the coach. When we get through the centuries into the 17th, 18th century, there's a lot more coach traffic. This is just an example of a coach. And also, next. It was a custom for some of the London hackney coaches in the late 1600s, the 17th century. Some of them would come up to provide a service running between town and fair. It's 1.75 miles. So it's a fair distance, isn't it, to walk out from town to the fair. And if you were prepared to pay your threepence, or 3 pence, I'm not going to do the conversions, you could have a seat in a coach like this, which would take you out to the fair. But you can see from this that there is a problem. The great damage to the streets in the town and to the highways, which are done by all these coaches running up and down. So the corporation is determined to try and get some money back, and it's going to demand a toll for 2 pence, 2 pence every time the coach runs up and down, or they can compound for the whole time of the fair for 5 shillings. 5 shillings is a fair bit of money then, if you think that lots of labourers in Cambridgeshire at this time were going to earn, well, not more than 10 shillings a week. So 5 shillings is a real sum. Next. So here we have the first map of the fair, the first time anybody actually put down exactly what it looked like. And we have to wait all the way to 1725. So from starting in 1211, when they got the charter, this is really quite a long time. A lot of things have happened. Some of the goods have come and gone. Times have changed, fashions have changed. But mostly it's still selling the same sorts of things as it did in the very early days. You needn't attempt to read all those tiny words. We're going to look at this map in 2 parts, with a bit bigger in a minute. So that's the outline. There's a Newmarket Road stretching around and bending off at the bottom of the picture, going past the chapel. Garlick Row is the row right up through the middle. And that's the path that's going across the common that we've just looked at. There's the river, of course. There's Chesterton Church over on the other side. That little inlet or outlet is still marked as the boundary between Riverside and the common. So you can see all these booths over here marked in are all on the common, and there would have been more wagons, temporary sorts of setups to selling pottery over here, and this was where the horse fair took place. The horse fair was a very important part of the fair and mentioned later on. And I assume these little railings are put up so that you can tie your horses to them. Symbolic rather than realistic, I think. But we'll look at this in more detail. We know from the very earliest times just one or two things about the medieval fair, and we have to guess the rest. We know that in the early century, royal providers came to the fair on one occasion to get cloth for the royal court from the fair, and on another occasion they came to buy the ironware that they needed when Cambridge Castle was being rebuilt. So all sorts of locks and fetters and hinges and all sorts of things were being bought in the Iron Fair, which was in this part of the fair. Oops, sorry, no, it's that part of the fair, Ironmongers Row. Even in the early days. And later on in the Middle Ages, we know from the accounts of a lady who lived 40 miles away in Suffolk, that she sent her steward to buy things like soap and herb, spices, and other commodities from the fair. And if she did, so did a lot of other people nearer than she was, but their accounts haven't survived. It's just that we have hers, so we know what was being bought by one gentlewoman out in Suffolk. The religious houses of the time in the Middle Ages were also buying goods in the fair, and some of their accounts survive. So we know people came from Thetford, we know people came from the houses in Bedfordshire, so quite a big area of people making their way by whatever means, whether it was coaches or carriages or walking or just horseback. They all flocked in. Next, please. So it was the most important event in the Cambridge season, really. It really was a highlight of the Cambridge year, and the corporation recognised it and took every attempt to make it a very ceremonial occasion. So the opening was always marked with a great procession out from town with the mayor, the aldermen, the common council, the freemen, the MPs, and a band of music and an entertainment in the mayor's booth. But they also, in the newspaper, used to quote the prices. And this is really important for people buying wholesale. And one of the important commodities was cheese. Cheese coming from the Midlands, Gloucestershire, Double Gloucester, Warwickshire, all over there. And so the newspaper would quote these wholesale prices per hundredweight. Another great commodity was hops. From the 16th century onwards, great quantities of hops were brought every year to sell to brewers. Next, please. So this was the procession. Just gives you an idea of how many people. The crier rode on horseback in scarlet, 28 petty constables, the marshal, the bellman, the sergeants at mace, the town clerk, finally the mayor in the middle, in his robes, his horse led by two redcoats. We'll come back to them. The members of parliament, the aldermen, the common councilmen, dispensers, bailiffs, treasurers, and then everybody else who would flock out for the formal opening. The formal opening that took place with every sort of market or fair, marked the point when you could start trading. So the university also had a share in this. I haven't mentioned the university, but as from the Middle Ages, the university was privileged to check weights, measures and prices in markets and fairs in Cambridge. They too brought their officials out, as we'll see. Next, please. Yeah. So today in September, we have this little event held at the Leper Chapel with a little reenactment. So here we have the university officials led by the senior proctor and the mayor and mayoress turn out. And the proctor is reading out one of the proclamations from earlier times, which said that nobody was to sell any substandard fish or substandard drink, or in measures that hadn't been checked and corrected by the university, and so on. It's a very long rigmarole. I'm always admiring that the senior proctor actually comes and says all this. Poor man. Different man every year, of course, as is the mayor. Next, please. And sometimes the university party brings some of their bits and pieces. There's a really nasty looking weapon behind that volume. Next, please. But also, this is a strange instrument, survived from those days when the university had to, or was, I mean, privileged to check the quality of the goods on sale. If you can see in this case, there's this brown tube with a little implement beside it. And it was used probably for sinking into barrels that contained things like butter or tallow to check that the quality of the contents was as good at the bottom of the barrel as it was at the top. This tube could bring you out a core on which you could check. And if the contents at the bottom of the barrel were substandard in some way, then it might be confiscated and the seller might be fined. I don't think they used the weapon at the back, but the university was quite capable of locking people up if they were sufficiently displeased with them, or even indulging in whipping in the early days. It was a rough time. And the next, please. So this is the top of the fair, as it's always called. This is the bit where you've got the Newmarket Road coming across here. It's named Cheapside in the middle. Cheapside just meant a marketplace, basically. That's the meaning of the word in London and here. It had nothing to do with the price range. The chapel is right over on the right-hand side. Next to it, the wool fair, with lots and lots of great loads of raw wool from the East Midlands, Rutland, Leicestershire, and so on. Silversmiths Row for the privileged gold and silver work. White leather fair. There's two qualities of leather. This is the sort that's going to make your gloves and perhaps other items of clothing. The most important bit in the whole fair almost is the duddery. This seems to be the only, or one of only two instances of the word duddery meaning cloth fair. The cloth was coming in very great quantities. The cloths are sort of 20 yards long and so on, and they're coming down from Yorkshire, Lancashire, some are East Anglian from Norfolk and Suffolk, being sold on to people who want it in London or elsewhere, and then in smaller quantities being sold on to local shopkeepers. The other great commodity we mark here is the cheese row here. The cheeses also, as we've just seen from that newspaper extract, were coming in quantity. These are big 56-pound cheeses coming from the Midlands being sold in this special bit of the fair here. We'll come to the show booths later. The skip fair, this is basketware. Skips before we had plastic, before we had all those sorts of things. Baskets were used for just about everything. Joiners Row for furniture. Booksellers will come to. Brazier's Row for brassware, tinware. Ironmongers, timber fair, it's all there. But down Garlick Row are some of the posher booths, catering for the upper classes, with fine silks and satins on the drapers' stalls and fine china when it comes in the 18th century, not in the earlier times, but once china, the potteries of the Stoke-on-Trent area, they start supplying the fair as well. And glassware, all that's being sold down Garlick Row. So it's very, very busy, you can see. And next, please. So the big booths looked like this. This is the only picture we've got. And this is the cutaway version. You can see they've taken off the outside so that we can see inside. And it's got a counter and shelves just like any town shop. These booths had to be put up every year. They were, as it were, stored away in between whiles. For 11 months they were stored away. Some were stored in the chapel. This is when it stopped being a chapel. So once it stopped being a chapel, it was then loaded up out of fair time with all the timbers and the horsehair cloths that were used for the roof until they were needed for the next year. And these big booths had these three parts. There was an awning at the front to keep customers nice and dry or keep the sun off if necessary. The main part, which could be possibly 12 by 24 feet, something like that. oh yeah, 3 meters by 4 or 5, some a bit bigger. And on the back was a bedroom. Now the artist here has drawn a nice little sort of four-posted beds. The commentaries just say they were camp beds that you could take out to air in the morning. But anyway, there was space there for the people running the booth to sleep, because only some of the booths were being run by Cambridge tradesmen. A great many more were being rented out to Londoners and others who wanted to sell here. So that was the fair booths. They were really important possessions too. If you were a Cambridge freeman, you could own booths and booth grounds, and they were passed down like any other piece of property to your heirs, or you could sell them on. But it was only Cambridge freemen who had the privilege of owning them. And they did bring in a good rent when the fair was at its height. This was quite a profitable bit of property to own. Next, please. Just a fun picture to say what it might have looked like inside. This is an cartoon version of the fashions of 1790 or so. Big hair, big wig, big hats, lots and lots of stuffing around the middle, and the poor chap in the middle doing the actual paying, of course. Next, please. So the newspaper, when we get the newspapers in the 18th century, we get a lot more information because so many people advertise in them. For those weeks of the fair, through from the very end of August through September, possibly into very early October, there are advertisements for some of the people who are going to be selling. So the people down this side, these are all Cambridge tradespeople. There are more of them, of course, but this is just a sample. Susan Powell, who's a milliner. So she's the lady who's selling not only hats, but all sorts of ladies' trimmings. And she's sharing the booth with Mr. Ivers, the shoemaker. They're always very obsequious, these advertisements. She hopes her friends will favour her with their custom. Mr. Harrison, the grocer, he's a really important Cambridge figure in his time, has his own shop near the Shire Hall, that's to say the Guildhall in the middle of Cambridge. But he brings out his goods to sell at the fair, including, by this time in the 18th century, tea, coffee, chocolate, tobacco, snuff, and all sorts of washing stuff, soap, vinegar, Durham mustard. Oh, yes, lots of stuff. And other grocers as well, including chandlers. So they're selling the candles there as well. Some of the visitors coming from other places, Mr. Phillips' glass booth is a very important enterprise. He's based in Norwich. He has an outlet in King's Lynn. Obviously, bringing his glass by water is much safer than trying to put it on a cart going down the bumpy roads. So he's bringing lots of glassware, not only for the table, but for physicians, doctors who need to put all their potions and their medicines in glass bottles. And Mr. Goddard Williams, a saddler to Her Majesty, no less, is coming up from London with saddlery ware. And next, please. Just pewter, very important. When pewter was in fashion from the time of Henry VIII, seen here, through to the 18th century, you could buy lots of your pewter. Next, please. And this is a university town still, so there is a market for books. It was one of the reasons the university couldn't stop students going to the fair, because there were important purchases they might need to make. And the most famous of all, of course, is Isaac Newton, who bought a book on astronomy at the fair. And there were, very good sales, even up to whole libraries being sold by the booksellers. The next. And just one or two more advertisements, just because I think they're fun, really. Mr. Corneck is a hosier. He's based in Nottingham, but he has a warehouse in Cheapside in London. So obviously a big way of business. Hosiery goods, so every sort of stocking and sock. Breeches pieces, sold already cut out, so that local tailors can then buy them in pieces and then adapt them to their customers. Discounts if you're going to spend as much as £5. As I've indicated, £5 is a lot of money. And Mr. Doig, who brings gauzes, really expensive fabrics, silks, and checkered silk handkerchiefs, which are 3 shillings a piece. Think about that, 3 shillings for a handkerchief, albeit silk. And the next, please. So these are some of the things you might have been buying in the 18th century fair. So Mr. Anstey lives at Trumpington, Anstey Hall, still there. And I don't know if he came to the fair, but I'd be surprised if he didn't, because everybody else did. So he could have bought all the material for his suit and the material for his cravat there. He could have brought his table, he could have brought his books, he could have brought his nice little silver inkwell set here, he could have bought the paper and even possibly his quill pen and his material for his little daughter's outfit and her hat, and maybe even her little fashion doll. Look at that, the fashions of the 1770s, quite extraordinary. Perhaps a little more ordinary. This lady, who's just a model, but she could have bought all the nice silks for her overdress here. She could have bought the petticoat, the quilted petticoat, and the milliner would have sold her this nice little light fichu thing and hats, I think, as well. So they could have been well outfitted at the fair. And next, please. And this is a reminder about the furniture man and all the things he could bring. So he would have had to use one of those very big wagons to bring all this lot. I can't imagine it. Was it 1 wagon or 2 or 3 that he brought it all in? But some of it, next picture, please. It would have looked like this. This is the sort of furniture of the time, from cupboards and desks and chairs and tables and goodness knows what. There was a bit of competition. There were 2 or 3 people vying for custom as furniture providers in that century. And next, please. And when you're absolutely exhausted from all this shopping, there are a number of victualling booths. So the coffee booth is perhaps the most important this sort of date in the 1700s. And Jacob Britton has a place in town. And in fact, the archaeologists who've been digging in the centre of Cambridge have found, amongst all the debris, some remains of his crockery with his name on it. So he's validated from both the written record and from the archaeological record. So here he is. Separate genteel rooms for coffee and tea, entertainment of company at dinner, and the nobility. And we know some people came out from Wimpole Hall for a visit, at least on one occasion. Greatest care taken to give satisfaction. It's going to be warm and convenient. The London papers are taken every day. Remember that. That's significant. And the next, please. Oh, yes. Would you like to read this yourselves? Just remember that there's a long S in this that looks a little bit like an F, but I think it's easy to read. So we're getting there. This must have been one of the greatest tragedies at the fair, I feel. Can you imagine being somewhere along Garlick Row with this brisk wind blowing and this poor fashionable lady suddenly exposed in the middle of the fair? We don't know who she was. The Celia at the bottom is reference to a poem about a lady taking 5 hours to get ready in the morning. There she is. That's what happens when you go in for these fashions with piled up false hair in your wig. Yes, a great tragedy reported in the Cambridgeshire collection. Oh, has my picture disappeared? I'm sorry, I'll get that back. Right, there we are. Next, please. That was me trying to change the picture. So the lower part of the fair, this is the other end next to the river. There's the Chesterton Church, of course. So naturally, this is the part where there's fish. It's a big fish market, especially in the Middle Ages when people weren't allowed to eat meat for certain parts of the year, Lent, Advent, various other festivals. And so fish replaced meat. So it was brought from the sea as well as locally, and some of it was dried and smoked and salted. And I'm told some of it was really very unpleasant, but I haven't tried it. The pot fair is for the more mundane pottery that's coming down from Ely, and the horse fair we've mentioned is over here. At the end of the fair, apparently, that was really very important, and it survived even after lots of the other commodities had gone their way. There were still horse sales into the beginning of the 20th century, and opportunities for people to ride up and down to try them out across the common. Over here, tallow, really important, candles. The university particularly was very worried about having sufficient candles so that it could read by night. And this is the coal fair. We'll see that again in a minute. The coal that's coming down from Northumbria by sea down to King's Lynn and then along the river. Oysters, oyster fair tucked in here, but the oysters were being sold at all the eating booths as well. And then the hops, we mentioned the hops, they come in huge, great sack loads of hops. Right, next please. Next, thank you. Just a reminder of what coal looks like. Some of us rarely see coal these days, but absolutely vital, of course, at that time. There really wasn't enough timber to keep people warm. We were absolutely dependent on the coal miners. Next, please. And after all that, what about entertainment? People always think fairs are about entertainment these days. Well, entertainment was very much a second thing at the fair. And this was an occasion when the university was interfering to stop entertainment. Officially, they had the right to license entertainments. Anything that was unlicensed wasn't allowed to take place. So this is the Vice Chancellor of the university saying that somebody has set up a theatre and the undergraduates are strictly prohibited from going there. And they've got to be noted by their college if they've turned up there. There was a lot to do about entertainments, and the university fined entertainments. Some people with a show or a display would turn up year after year. They just paid the fine and then got on with it. Next. So some of the entertainments. Now, I love this. Mount Vesuvius, a representation of the great eruption of Mount Vesuvius. If you think back to 1797, nobody in this country almost has seen a volcano or knows anything about a volcano. Only the classicists who've been reading about Vesuvius in Roman times will know about what Vesuvius could do. So this must have been very, very striking. But you will see admittance is 1 shilling. It's quite expensive. On the other hand, you had a lot of individuals who were very, very tall, or very, very short, or in some other way physically different. And this is the female Colossus. I love her. Stupendous height and just symmetry. The tallest and finest woman in Europe, and one of triplets. She's met with universal applause, and the prices this time, I love this. Ladies, gentlemen and ladies, according to their liberality. Tradesmen, etc., sixpence, children and servants, threepence. So you wonder how liberal did the gentlemen and ladies wish to be? Were they going to fork out a whole shilling, as they would have done for Mount Vesuvius, or did they try and sneak in with 9pence or 8pence or something less? There we are. So there were a great many of these shows, some of them advertised in the Cambridge Chronicle. I think some of them didn't even. Next, please. And towards the end of that century, finally, theatres were allowed and the university stopped objecting, partly because members of the university wanted to see the shows. So there was a music booth, at the upper end of Garlick Row, grand concert, lots of singing in several parts, blah, blah. And here are the two theatres represented. So you can see they've got stairs up to a gallery, both of them, as well as a pit and the boxes. This is the cheese row down the bottom here. Can you see the big cheeses, the big circular cheeses? So the theatre was really quite important at the end of the fair, and thank you. Next. All right. And we have one or two of the programs or the sales leaflets still surviving. So this one, I like this one. Anybody go to see The Rivals last week at the Arts? So here it was being performed in 1791. And that's the cast exactly as it was last week. But you also got a second show. I defy the arts to put on two shows in one evening. Captain Cook, terrible tragedy of Captain Cook, but also another sample of a volcano. It's a different sort in Hawaii. Oh, how would you like to pronounce that? But it's Hawaii, isn't it? And here we have it. Going to begin at 6. The boxes cost you 3 shillings. The pit is 2 shillings. Gallery and slips a shilling. Ticket can be had in Cambridge, the bookseller on Market Hill. Ladies and gentlemen requested to send their servants early to keep places. Now there's a thing. The servants go and sit in the seat and then give it up when their lady or gentleman turns up to actually watch the show. One of the other advertisements, thank you, has instructions about the coaches waiting outside. We don't know if there were roundabouts. This is just a contemporary picture. There's young boys pushing this round in the middle. This is pre-electricity, pushing this round so that the better off children can ride on the horses and the mock carriage and so on the outside, really like a modern children's roundabout. And this lady's collecting the money and he's shouting and trying to encourage people to come. And also, next picture, there might have been these other sorts of entertainment as well. It was probably a very noisy place. One of the things the university tried to find people for was making a noise and attracting a crowd. But here we are. Here's the man playing bells on his head, his feet and his hands, with his accompanying chap who's going to collect the money. And this solo man with his little peep show, he has to blow his own trumpet. You can see he's got his trumpet ready to blow to try to attract customers to his little peep show. And the next. So this is the only other drawing we've got of the fair, and this again does show the booths, these booths with their 3 parts, the front, the shop in the middle and the sleeping booth at the back, various comments. So this was where we saw the picture of the theatres. This is the cheese here. Going down onto the common, it still has the pottery and the horse fair. The man who drew this was remembering it from his youth. So he's drawing it many, many years later, and we're talking about the end of the 18th century. This is the coal heaps. I have no idea how they managed the sales of coal from these coal heaps. A tricky manoeuvre. You can see lots of boats on the river, but his recollections are not entirely accurate. Look where he's drawn Chesterton Church. It should really be over there somewhere. Yeah, but it's not. He just remembers you look across the river and there's the church. And the other thing he's drawn wrong, really, is the chapel. Yeah, he's drawn the chapel. But it's not at the top of Garlick Row, is it? It's all the way over to the right, a long way off. But I suspect that the time when he was visiting at the end of the 1700s, there perhaps wasn't as much going on along the road there, along Cheapside, as it was called. Maybe the fair was drawing back round to Garlick Row, and he just remembered that you'd got Garlick Row and you've got a chapel, and he's drawn them next to each other. So the fair was definitely declining as the 18th century drew to a close. Next, please. And Mr. Purchase, one of the bigger shop owners in Cambridge, says he begs leave to inform his friends he shall decline keeping a booth at Stourbridge Fair. And he hopes everybody's going to come to his shop in town. His shop actually was the forerunner of Eden Lily, and where TK Maxx is today. So, and the next, please. And what was going to take the place of the fair? The brickworks. The fair shrinks down to very, very little indeed, because the whole pattern of trade changes. The really big production centres are in the Midlands and in the north. They're selling abroad, so going through the outlets of Bristol and Liverpool, and East Anglia becomes a backwater. But in Cambridge, this is the time when the fields are enclosed, so the whole Barnwell field is divided up into discrete holdings from being strips everywhere, and the people who own plots in the fields can then use them for whatever, for building or for agriculture, or in this case for digging for clay for brick making. And we know there are a lot of brickworks down Newmarket Road. Next, please. And the chapel itself has been useful, as I've said, for keeping the booths when in their deconstructed state in between fairs. During the fair itself, it was functioning as a pub. At one point, you could sell a lot of beer in there, apparently. But it's then being abandoned as the fair shrinks and it's not needed anymore. And Mr. Kerridge, a university man, comes along and realizes that it is a beautiful example of early medieval architecture. It's got this wonderful Norman arch and its little Norman windows, and it ought to be preserved. So he acquires it, makes it over to the university, and then through various changes, finally down to the present day, it comes into the possession of Cambridge past, present and future. And next, please. Looked after beautifully, sometimes used as a chapel, but also used during our little fair time for talks and music and selling cups of tea. But you can get married here if you wish. I know people who've been married here. Next, please. So after the fair has declined, what happens for a little while? Not very much, of course, because Cambridge is slowly creeping out from the centre out to its boundaries. But now we have a situation where the common has been preserved. Here is the common. This is the area which had been taken up by the fair. There's the path over to the ferry, as was. Riverside along here. But all these buildings, of course, are the commercial buildings that are occupying a space formerly occupied by the fair. And the chapel, just tiny building down here. So the duddery had existed over here. Difficult to imagine here. Now we've got the water there. A very different situation, but this had been where the great cloth sales took place over here before the pond was created, I assume, on one of the old brick pits. So that really almost brings us to the end. Next, please. So, as I said, in September, we have this little September Saturday afternoon to try to remember the fair with its proclamation from the university. And I do like the way they all turn out in their proper gear. It's very kind of them, complete with these weapons behind here and the mayor, and a little bit of entertainment, as well as the chance to buy all sorts of things, some handmade goods, all sorts of bits and pieces. Next, please. And the chance to join in with the capriole dancers and do a little bit of dancing on the grass as well. So that's the end. That's a rush through my history of the fair and how it has related to the common. Part of the common has been used for the fair, but preserved from building by the careful care of Cambridge Corporation, so not to be built upon, although occasionally flooded in times past, of course, and maybe today. Thank you very much. A bit of a rush, but I hope that's, for those of you who didn't know much about the fair, that's filled you in with a little bit of it.
What a very interesting talk. And we've got some questions, but also if anyone wants to write questions down in the chat now, please do, because I'm going to read them out and Simon will also pick up a few.
Okay, right.
So Paul Saunders, he's kicking off with, I assume Reach Fair and Stourbridge Fair alternated at some time, one spring, one summer.
They didn't alternate. They were running concurrently, yes, because Reach was back in Rogation Tide before we had a May bank holiday to attach it to. Yes, less is known about Reach Fair, but yes, it was founded in the Middle Ages for the benefit of Cambridge town. It always seems very strange, doesn't it? The fairs that are in Cambridge are not for the benefit of the town initially. The Stourbridge is for the Leper Chapel. The Midsummer Fair was for the Priory. And there was a little garlic fair that was really for the nunnery, I think. But Reach Fair, yeah, began for the corporation, still opened by the corporation, despite having to travel all the way out there to do it. But again, it's water transport, isn't it? That's the critical factor.
So they both ran every year, basically, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Do you know when Rich Fair started? Was that around the same time, or was that
I
later?
think it's about the same time. I don't know if we've got a charter date for it. Sorry, I can't remember that. But
Okay,
yeah, it's
that's right.
the same sort of era. Yeah. That was when the big fairs across the country were being set up as the best means of passing on goods, really. You could have your local weekly market, and then for other things, you had the annual fair.
Yeah.
There was the St Ives Fair, which became
Oh,
huge.
yes. St Ives Fair was very important and sort of preceded Stourbridge in importance. But I think it was problems with the river that caused that to decline. But yeah, it was very, very important. And there were reports of foreign traders coming to that, where I can't find any foreign traders coming to Stourbridge.
Oh, well, that is next question. Joe says, thank you, Honor. Are there any accounts of merchants travelling to the fair from overseas? And how does the size of the fair compare to others in the UK or
Ah,
Europe?
right. I haven't found any reports of traders from overseas. I suspect that London took over. If you were coming from the continent or from Italy, you would come in probably through London or one of the major ports, and the enterprising businessmen there would take over the trade, to save these foreigners having to travel up country. But so I haven't found any reports, but I believe there are some for St Ives earlier on. Sorry, what was the other half of that?
Um, Size of the fairs.
Oh, the size. Oh, well, Daniel Defoe, when he writes about it in the 1720s, having probably known it a bit earlier as well, thinks it's certainly the biggest in this country and thinks it compares to any of the continental fairs as well. Though how anybody would work that out, I don't know really. How do you measure the size? There seems to be no actual physical boundary. There's no fence around it or guard points, but they must have known in theory where a boundary was, because the two courts that were held in the fair had their jurisdiction just in the fair. So if you were doing something wrong outside wherever the fair boundaries were, you were up before the courts in town.
Interesting. Paul again. Paul says, I imagine someone else would sleep at the stalls. Some would sleep at the stalls to prevent theft too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, well, imagine so. I mean, again, Defoe's comment is that they're not really that secure. Okay, they're timber buildings, but the doorway is a bit of cloth held together with a stick, he says. And a lot of people, of course, there wasn't room for everybody, all the people who came. I mean, the town was, lodgings were full, all the barns in Barnwell were full of the poorer people. Yeah, there were cases of theft commented on in the newspapers in the 18th century, but they seem to have been daytime theft. Bit of pickpocketing, a bit of nabbing things from counters and so on. Occasionally something a bit bigger than that, stealing a horse, and riding off on it or attempting to. But yeah, yes, people sleeping at the back of the booth is the most secure element of it.
Hmm. B. Fawcett, she says, fascinating. Thank you. The senior proctor you mentioned is our son.
Oh, jolly good. How splendid.
A bit
Jolly
of
good.
gown with town there. Hmm. Um, so Mary Burgess, I'll be there with Bessie the book bike again. Come and say hi. That's
Oh,
when
jolly good.
the next.
Yes.
When's that
Yeah.
going to be?
Well, I had the date on the end there, didn't I? It's the 5th September. It's the first Saturday in September. Um, and it's always that one so that it doesn't coincide with big events in town as well. I mean, it should really be the next Saturday, but you know.
I think the
So yeah,
next
Mary will
Saturday
be there.
coincides with Open Cambridge. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, that's right. There's so many events. So it's the Saturday before, and I think it's the 5th this year.
It is the 5th,
It
yes,
is the
just around
5th.
the
Thank
slide.
you, Simon. Thank you.
So we've got FH State Clerk. Sorry if this has already been covered, but wondering if you can talk about servant auctions. I have heard
Mm,
about them. I'm
oh
wondering
yeah,
how these work.
not here. They were. There's no comment about any hiring of servants at Stourbridge at all. There certainly were servant fairs. I mean, most people who were in that sort of line of work served for a year, or very often served for a year, and would go to one of these hiring fairs whenever they were held, usually in the autumn, I think, with some symbol or mark to show what sort of work they were looking for. The sort of thing mentioned in Thomas Hardy's books, aren't they? And yeah, it was a way of recruiting or being recruited for a year's work. Maybe longer, of course, if you and the or the employer and the employee agreed, and they would stay on. But it's a lot of rotation, but not at Stourbridge. How people found their employees or how people found work around Cambridgeshire, I don't know.
Interesting
Word of
then.
mouth, I suspect, usual.
Hmm, hmm. So Katie, was bitch an old word for bridge?
It's the way bridge gets corrupted. I mean, we're all careless in the way we speak, aren't we? So you can see the name coming from Steersbridge down the centuries, and bridge just, yeah, gets deformed into bitch, and star into or stir into STIR. So yes, it gets to be spelt STIR, bitch. The interesting little bit is in the middle of the 18th century, when the newspaper is putting up all these advertisements, and as you could see in that case with the heading Stourbridge Fair, there's one year when the first advertisements at the beginning of September are spelt like that. The very next week, the copy of the paper, all those instances have been turned into Stour Bridge. Somebody has got at the editor of the paper to say, oh, it shouldn't look like that at all. It shouldn't look like that at all. And they tried to make a case for the little stream being called the Stour, but there's no evidence for that at all. So yeah, we have ended up with Stourbridge rather than Stourbridge again, being tidied up.
And Sheedy, you mentioned Barnwell Priory at the start. What connection, if any, do you think the Priory had with the fair?
None at all. They had their own fair. A midsummer fair is the Priory fair. I mean, it would have started outside the Priory on Newmarket Road, yeah, roughly where the roundabout is today, and extended down Newmarket Road. I think when Newmarket Road is that little bit wider, isn't it? As you Sun Street, Sun Lane, it's called or something. That bit, I assume that wider bit of the street was where the Midsummer Fair started off, and then gradually migrated down onto the common. But it was there for the benefit of the Priory, and it did get taken over by the corporation, roughly as in the same way that Stourbridge got taken over by the corporation.
So that links to Katie saying Priory Road and Abbey Road are quite a way to the west of the common. Were they connected? So
Well, I'm trying to think where they are. West of the west. Oh, I think my
Yes, west into the
yeah.
towards the city.
Well, the Priory was absolutely on Newmarket Road, where the little St Andrew's Church is, and where the Abbey House is, and that was, and its lands went down from there towards the river. But that was its site, absolutely. And all sorts of other things, of course, have acquired the name since, which aren't necessarily next door, like the Abbey Stadium.
So there's a Zoom user here. He doesn't have a name.
Oh,
Says, I was the local policeman for this area in the 1980s, and I learned quite a bit I didn't know. With
oh,
three thumbs up, three thumbs up. Um, when were the lepers no longer there?
oh, right. Well, yes, that there is a record. The Priory, the Leper Hospital having been started in the 1100s, it's only a century later when there's a survey of Cambridge which looks at all the property and labels all the property owners and blah blah blah, and it gets to the Leper Hospital and says that the warden is no longer keeping any lepers, as of right he ought to do. That's the only comment we have. Whether they ever came back, the warden having been ticked off for not having any, or whether there were not so many people suffering from leprosy. It's a bit of a mystery to me, at least. I don't know if the experts know better about how leprosy was an issue in early medieval Europe. Lots of towns had a leper hospital. You can find traces of them all over the place, not the buildings really, but the distant memory. And then they all collapsed. Oh, we had another one, was labelled as a leper hospital in the 1300s in Trumpington Street, roughly where Addenbrooke started. People say it was founded as a leper hospital. There's no evidence of lepers particularly. And it turns into ordinary almshouse. And the almshouse moves from there down into Newtown, still there, sort of. But yeah, the disappearance of leprosy, more or less, from Europe is, it's one of those unknown factors, really. I suppose if you're sufficiently vigilant in preventing the infection, yeah, you may be able to stop it spreading, and the poor
I wonder
unhappy
if there's
souls.
any evidence of leprosy from the skeletons of the excavation in around the Divinity School.
Oh, I don't know. You have to ask the antiquarian people.
I think
I'm
people
not
will be
aware
doing
at
a
the
bit of
moment of
Googling there.
us having traces of leprosy in any local skeletons. No.
I
Be
don't remember
interesting.
reading about it, no, but that's
Yeah.
a very interesting question.
Yeah. Well, if we
Apart from
dug up round the site of the Leper Hospital, I'm sorry, Cambridge past, present, and future, I'd absolutely love an excavation round there. What would we find if we were allowed to dig up round the chapel? Yep.
that would be an interesting project. Apart from the next one, uh, apart from Garlic Row and Oyster Row, is there any fair connection with the name of nearby Cutthroat Lane?
Sorry, nearby which?
That's from Cutthroat Lane. That's
Oh,
Kay
no.
Sands.
Oh, no, don't know about that one.
So
Or
I've
if
just been looking up Cutthroat Lane on capturing Cambridge. It's just over the other side of the bridge off Newmarket Road, and apparently it used to be known as Cut Through Lane.
Ah,
Um,
right.
and somehow it changed to Cutthroat Lane. So that's one of those odd occasions where
Yeah,
something changed into like a more a strange name rather than being watered down.
yeah.
I don't know why it went that way, but yeah, there you go.
This is P. Mar. Does your talk, which I highly admired, reflect an issue with the evidence? Viz., there's more in the 18th century, but the fair was at its most important in the 15th, 16th and 17th century.
Yeah, it is a question of evidence. Yes, I mean that's when we've got the maps. That's when we've got the newspapers and pictures. The earlier periods we haven't. I mean, when the fair charter was confirmed to the town under Queen Elizabeth, that is when there is this whole preamble to the confirmation of the charter, which says that the fair is absolutely vital to the economy of the area and of England, and that it's selling all these various commodities which it names. But we haven't got any pictures. Don't know what it looks like. And we only have passing references to where it was recorded that the booths were being sold on or inherited. The whole process of owning a booth or passing it on had to go through the corporation, so it gets recorded in the town council minutes that so and so is giving over their booth to somebody else. So we do know the names of the booths, and we know roughly where they are. We don't know what they're selling in them. And it's only outsiders' accounts. As I said, it's like the lady in Suffolk or the religious houses or one or two other big houses where they actually do keep financial accounts that tell us what people are buying at the fair or occasionally selling. There's lovely accounts from a chap in Suffolk who's buying wool every year for 50 years, but that again is the 18th century, not earlier.
So was there people who owned these booths down to the 19th and 20th century? Is there multiple ownerships of plots of ground down there where they all bought up?
Well, they all died a death, of course, because it's your ownership of a booth ground is useless if nobody wants to sell anything in it. So that they just ceased to have any use at all, really. The corporation had owned a number of booths because they'd been bequeathed to the corporation, so that in the early times the corporation would then arrange for prayers to be said for the donor. But they all disappear under Mortlock, John Mortlock, the great ruler of Cambridge at the end of the 18th century. They get swallowed up, dispersed. But yeah, I mean, when there's no use for them, they just die, basically. But before that, it's a valuable commodity, owning a booth.
We're coming to the end, but there are a couple more. Tony Jewell has contributed to the leprosy debate by saying it declined after 1400s and largely gone by 1600s.
Yeah.
Then Joe says, didn't St John's Hospital refuse to admit care for people with leprosy along with pregnant women, etc.?
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah.
Going out.
Yes, they were quite particular about who they were prepared to admit. Yes, nobody who was going to be too much trouble or indeed infectious.
It's interesting that the Leper Chapel was right out towards the boundary with Fen Ditton, and then in later centuries, the infectious diseases hospital was right out towards the boundary of Cambridge was chosen. So
that's absolutely universal. In any town you go to, you can spot where the people who aren't wanted are out near the boundary. It's true of Birmingham, it's true of Exeter, places I've been, and other places. Yeah, you'll find that the hospitals, especially the infectious ones, are out near the boundaries. The workhouses, where necessary, are out on the edge of town. Anything like that. Yeah, prisons always tend to be out near the edge, away from everybody else.
Zoomuser contributes to Cutthroat Lane led to the airport when it was on Coldham's Common in the 1930s.
All right.
So my grandparents told me they lived in Ditton Fields from when it was built.
All right.
So local knowledge is a great thing. Bruce Sutherland, in which year was the fair last held?
1933. 3 technically, I think, by which time it was down to an ice cream stall and the mayor announcing it. I mean, it really did. The announcing of the fair went on, even though it had substantially died. During the 19th century, it was just a local affair. All the big traders from elsewhere had stopped coming because they just moved on and were practicing their trades in other ways. So the 19th century was very much just a local affair. And then, of course, yeah, people didn't need it. It was too far out of town. Horses were being replaced by motor vehicles. You didn't need the horse fair anymore. So yeah, but it still goes on being opened officially until it has to be very officially closed, which happens after that. So there's no fair in 34. I think those are the 2 years. Yeah.
So Anna Snowden says, marvelous talk, Honor. I think you have written a book about the fair, question mark.
I have. You'll have to hunt for a copy. I have a tiny handful for anybody who really needs one. But otherwise, yeah, I'm afraid they've all dispersed. Oh, I think there's some in the Cambridgeshire collection. Mary, if she's there, will be able to confirm if they've still got 1 or 2 in there in the Cambridgeshire collection.
Mary might not be there.
No, right. Well,
You could possibly. I bought mine quite recently at the Museum of Cambridge, but I'm not sure they've still got any.
Yeah, they did have a few, but I'm not sure whether they have any more. Yeah, yeah. Those are the last ones, as far as I know. I haven't tried looking at other sources to see if there are any more coming back secondhand or anything.
Honor, I think that's the end of the questions, and I'm going to pass you over to lots of thank yous. That was fascinating. Lots of appreciation on the chat.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Yeah.